I'm Amy, and welcome to night number 6 of the 13 Nights of Halloween. I was going through Google looking for some ideas, some inspiration for the 13 Nights of Halloween, and a game that came up is like a scavenger hunt, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Turns out there is a Halloween bookshelf scavenger hunt. It was created by Ink and Pages, so I will link that down below, but they already have a list for some scavenger hunt stuff. So I'm going to be going through my shelves, finding answers to these scavenger hunt prompts, and I'm sitting on my couch, which is very close to this table that the candelabra is on, which is in front of my books. So I am already a klutz. I don't need to add fire, literal fire, to the situation. So let's go ahead and get started. The first prompt for the scavenger hunt is 3 titles that sound like potion ingredients. So let's see what I can cook up. Alright, I've looked through my shelves. I have 3 books here. I actually have 4, which I will get into. But 3 titles that sound like potion ingredients. And the first ones I found were Fuzz, Butterflies, and Butts. Not sure what kind of potion we're making. If it's gonna be like a butterfly fart situation or a hairy butt situation, I don't know. Fuzz by Mary Roach is looking at the laws of nature. So like, you shouldn't be feeding bears, and you should be closing your trash cans or putting your garbage bags up in a tree while camping, or how big cats have attacked people in, I think India was the one that was explored, but it's different stories of how nature and people have interacted and the laws that have been built around those, and some of those laws pertain to the animals themselves. I specifically remember a very interesting introduction to this, where caterpillars were sued for the destruction that they made, but by the time the lawsuit was over, the caterpillars had long ago transformed into moths or butterflies and died. So very, very fun look, particularly with where I live here in Montana. We do a lot of camping. There is a lot of interaction with nature, so that book really spoke to me. A Swift Guide to Butterflies. I have several butterfly books on my shelves. I love butterflies. I'm kind of a butterfly hobbyist. I did find a butterfly, a dead butterfly, on the ground at Toyota when I went to get my car checked out. And I'd looked at a tutorial for how to pin the butterfly. So you put it in a container with a wet paper towel, and you have it like on netting to suspend above, and you put some Lysol in there so it doesn't mold, and you let it kind of soak and get wet a bit so that you can stretch it out. And I did that, and it wasn't quite open enough, so I put it in again, I forgot about it, and it got moldy. So disappointing. But I would like to try pinning my own butterflies at some point. Butterflies that I find around that are no longer living. I'm not going to kill butterflies for this, but regardless, hobbyist lepidopterist is my thing. I take butterfly books camping with me. Butts, a Backstory. This is a book that I read this year. I got this copy at a store in Hawaii, and it's the history of butts. They talk about Sarah Bartman, I believe is how the name was pronounced. She was a Black woman who had very large rump and was taken around to events and museums and just kind of used to draw people in and make money. Her life was miserable. And it goes all the way from Sarah Bartman to Kim Kardashian, one of the most famous butts of our time, and just why are we so obsessed with butts? Butterflies, Fuzz, and Butts. What kind of potion am I making with this? Also, I love that these are all bright yellow or yellowy green covers. I think that's amazing. The 4th book that I mentioned that I picked up is The Dance of Anger. This was recommended to me by Hillary from Melted Books. It's a book from the 80s, but I still think it's pretty good and holds up relatively well, talking about how to deal with your anger. And I just felt like The Dance of Anger sounded like what you would name a potion, so picked this up as a bonus 4th book. Next is pumpkins in book or on cover. I looked through these prompts a little bit ahead of time just to get ideas, and I have thought and thought and thought, and I cannot think of a single book that stands out to me that would have pumpkins, because I know I don't have pumpkins on my book covers, but I'm thinking if there are any books that take place during Halloween where pumpkins might be mentioned. And the only one that I can think of that I would have is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I don't remember if Halloween was mentioned in that book. Maybe it would have pumpkins, but I don't really have an answer for this one. Third prompt on this scavenger hunt is Trick or Treat, book that you have the most love-hate relationship with. So the book I'm going for this, Megan, from Reading with Megan, don't kill me for this, Brother, I think is going to be my best answer to that. It's not so much love-hate as love-disinterest. Brother is following a family of murderers and cannibals. They torture and kill people at their house that they've come across, usually on the side of the road, people that they don't think are going to be missed. And there is a son in this family who's very uncomfortable with what is happening. And it was a lot of disinterest for me in reading this because this character was so naive. And I get that growing up in this environment, there's going to be a lot of naivete and just not understanding the real nature of what's going on around you and having mixed emotions about it. But when it comes to super, super naive characters, it's just like, I kind of want to bop them on the head and just be like, get your shit together. Where's your common sense? So for a lot of this book, I just wasn't super interested or invested in some of the things that were happening, but the ending got me. I've told this story once or twice before on my channel. I'll tell it again. I was in bed in the evening with my husband and our younger cat, and I finished this book, and I let out this like screech because of the ending, and my younger cat is already really jumpy, and I scared the shit out of him. He was out of that room. He would not come back to the bedroom for 2 hours. Very upset with me. I literally almost threw this book, except I didn't want to damage the book, but the ending was so horrible and frustrating and awesome. Like, horrible in a good way. Like, oh my god, I can't believe the author would do that to me. What is wrong with her? Excellent ending. So this is going to be my answer for my love-hate book. Now we have a book with bloodstains on the cover. I can't think of any immediately, but that's why this is a scavenger hunt. I'm gonna have to look through and see what I can find. Okay, bloodstains on the cover. I have a couple of options here. I went through, I could actually only find one that had actual blood stains, but I did find lots of dripping blood, so I went ahead and included that. I'll walk through some of these really quickly because I talk about them quite a bit, or I've done reviews on them. I have The Weight of Blood. You have this woman in a prom dress, and there's dripping glittery blood. This is by Tiffany D. Jackson. It's an amazing book. I already loved Carrie by Stephen King, and this is a retelling, a reimagining of Carrie by Stephen King, except with race added in, which I think made a much more powerful story than the original, which I already liked. Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. We have Dripping Blood on This Moon. This is about women's relationships with each other, transforming and changing yourself. We've got a werewolf in here. This wasn't my favorite Rachel Harrison, but it's still a good time. Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This is a book I think of as very meta. It really is a commentary on horror while also being a horror book. This is probably his most unpopular book. I actually really enjoyed it. I have a review that I will link up above. Sorry, unpopular opinion, I enjoyed this book. Lastly, this is the one with the actual blood stains. I'd never heard this book talked about, and then I think I heard about it maybe in a Reddit post or something, But I have a thing for Dracula, I have a thing for vampire books. No one ever talks about this. George R.R. Martin has written books besides Game of Thrones. I was never interested in reading George R.R. Martin. I heard too many things about all of the rampant sexual assault in Game of Thrones. I'm not interested in political stories at all, so political fantasy is never going to be something I'm very into, and I'm like, I'll just never read George R.R. Martin. Turns out he wrote a vampire book. This is Fever Dream. We are following a steamboat captain who takes this strange man aboard his ship because he's getting a lot of money for it. And this strange man is a vampire, and he's trying to live his vampire life a little differently. And there's another group of vampires that don't agree with that. I did really enjoy Fever Dream and would recommend it to people who are a fan of the vampire genre and historical fiction. My book stack is already about to tip over, and we're not even halfway through with this. Cursed. Book that you hate the most. Book that I hate the most. I don't typically finish books that I hate the most, so it would have to be a book that I probably DNF'd because I wasn't enjoying it. The series with the 3-body problem by, was it Sichin Liu? The first book I really liked. It was sci-fi. I'm looking through my review posts because I did a really angry book about the second one. Dark Forest by Sichin Liu. I'm probably killing that name. Chinese author. So the 3-body problem is like humans meet aliens, takes place in China. There's some political history that we go through. And I remember really enjoying the first book. I'll link both reviews up above. But the second one, The Dark Forest, and I find this a lot with Asian authors specifically. Obviously, there are a ton of problematic American authors, but of all of the other countries that I have read books from, Japan and China tend to be the most sexist from what I've experienced. And The Dark Forest, like the 3-body problem was good. There was some sexism, it was relatively mild, it's like, okay, whatever. And then The Dark Forest, just, women were nothing to this author. They were absolutely nothing characters. They were so hypersexualized, just so uncomfortable to read. I ended up hating that book. I even called my review a feminist rants. That would probably be my most hated book that I can think of, and I wasn't able to finish the series. I wanted to because I was enjoying the premise, but that second book just killed me. I can only deal with sexism up to a certain point, and when a woman is nothing but a body of boobs, like, that's... forget it. I can't do it. Next, prompt for our scavenger hunt, a book that mentions witches in the blurb. Now, is this gonna be like a review blurb? Like a book summary? Let me look at my witch shelf and see what I can find. Alright, I have 3 books with witch in the blurb. I have Alice Hoffman's Magic Lessons. This is the 3rd book in the Practical Magic series. This is discussing the original witch who started off the curse of everyone that the witches in The Lion fall in love with ends up dying. And it says, storytelling is in Hoffman's bones. Bewitching. So we've got witch in that. Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This is my favorite book of hers. This is talking about women and friendships. And we've got the witchy vibes, we've got the mysterious woman, and it says wry, dark, and deliciously witchy. Then I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. Tituba is one of the kind of servant women. I believe she worked for the Goods, or the, who is the pastor guy who was like in charge of the whole Salem thing? Really shitty person. But I, Tituba is about the black woman who worked for the family, and the kind of subtitle is Black Witch of Salem. Historical fiction. Really enjoyed this one. The author's from Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe? I've never been sure on that. Kind of like Caribbean or Caribbean. I'm never sure which way to say it. Died several years ago, but this is a book that I don't hear anyone talking about, and considering it's about a black servant or black maid in Salem during the time of the witch trials, I think more people should pick this one up. Next is a story in which a book is burned. There's only one book I can think of for that. What other book is there to talk about but Fahrenheit 451? This is a classic. I'm not sure why they feel the need to print this book so big. It's maybe 100 pages. All right, this one's 158 pages, but a lot of this thickness is more a discussion on the book, the story, and the film that I really wasn't interested in. But Fahrenheit 451, we're following a guy who has to go around finding people who are hiding books, and he burns them. I believe this was a take on the Nazi book burning, but it's a real discussion of the knowledge that we hide from people. And I like that in the end he ends up finding this society where people each choose one book and they memorize the entire thing. They read it over and over and over again until they have the whole thing memorized word for word. I found that to be super interesting. So, book that mentions book burning. A book with black and orange on the cover. I know it's right behind me. Again, this one's kind of an obvious one, but orange is the new black. This is a memoir about my year in a women's prison from Piper Kerman. We're all pretty familiar with the show. It really took off. There's like 8 seasons of it? Sorry, I can see the cat hair on my nose. This book, I remember being really different from the show. The first season was great. A lot of the other seasons get super, super intense. I cannot speak as to how similar it was to actual prison life, but this is just about her year going through the women's prison, what life was like. It wasn't as intense, but the elements of the original story were certainly in that first season of the TV show. Thought it was a good time. It was pretty worth the hype. It's good writing. It's a great story to tell. So, book with black and orange on the cover. Then our next prompt is find a title with 13 letters in it. That's going to take me a bit. Alright, so 13 is typically an unlucky number unless you're Taylor Swift, and so I find it kind of, I don't know that ironic is the right word, but the book I found with 13 letters in the title is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I did read this book. My husband has also read this book. I feel like he said he enjoyed it. I hated it. This was back after I learned that I liked dystopia, but when I was still trying to figure out what I liked about it. Because for the longest time, I hated dystopian novels. I don't do dystopian movies. They are way too depressing for my taste. And dystopian books I hated for a while because, again, depressing, and they tended to not be the best written books. Sorry to say it, unpopular opinion. I tried reading 1984 and I wasn't into it. But I've found if I'm going to read a dystopia, it pretty much has to be written by a female author. Because particularly when it comes to sex and gender and pregnancy and marriage and things like that, I feel like male authors writing dystopias just miss out on so much depth in the story. And it's been a while since I've read this, but it's a darkly satiric vision of a utopian future, where humans are genetically bred and pharmaceutically anesthetized to passively serve a ruling order. So the idea's there, but not only did I hate the story and the women felt like they really weren't important characters, but even in learning how the humans were bred, I was bored because the writing for me was just so poorly done. And I've said this before, but I feel like in my experience, science fiction, particularly classic science fiction, tends to be one of the more sexist genres in my experience. I find that interesting. I don't know that there's any research into that. I don't know that I have a leg to stand on with that. That's just my experience. But Brave New World, I counted 13 letters. I hated this book. I kept it on my shelves because I thought my husband enjoyed it. It fits on my dystopian shelf. Fine, whatever. Now we have Find a Book with a Shadow on It. The Silent Wife. I don't know that I've actually talked about this on my channel before because I read it years ago. I'll go through the back really quickly because I'm a bit rusty. Jody and Todd are at a bad place in their marriage. Much is at stake, including the affluent life they lead in their beautiful waterfront condo in Chicago, as she, the killer, and he, the victim, rush haplessly toward the main event. He is a committed cheater. She lives and breathes denial. He exists in dual worlds. She likes to settle scores. He decides to play for keeps. She has nothing left to lose. I thought this was a really intense, fast-paced book. We're following this couple as they get closer and closer to the death. If I remember correctly, the wife is a therapist as well. I really loved this book. I've been wanting to reread it for a while, so might try and pick it up in the next year. Next prompt is find the word ghost in a book. I of course had to go straight to this one because it's all about the ghosts, or rather not about the ghosts. That is The Perfectly Fine House. I found this book recommended on Instagram from a horror Instagram. It was either Spooky Mommy or Mother Horror. I get the two accounts mixed up because they have very similar contact and they interact with each other a lot. But this is about Donna Fitzpatrick. She runs a surrogacy agency. As a ghost, you could pay to take over someone else's body to do things like have sex or eat food, just have those really human physical experiences. And the most terrifying thing in this world is the discovery of a house that is not haunted, because ghosts are super common. They're everywhere. It's pretty normal to have a ghost roommate. There is, and I think he's an exorcist, but it's not to like kill ghosts. It's just like, oh, your ghost is re-experiencing their death over and over and it's really annoying because they're early in the ghost phase or they're going through something emotional. I can come into your apartment, I can boot that ghost out for at least a short period of time until they get themselves together again, or if they come back. It's kind of like ghost pest control, like I'm gonna get rid of your shitty ghost roommate. Loved that aspect of it. It just took society as we know it and added ghosts, and that really flipped it on its head. I particularly remember an interesting discussion on the family dynamic where parents don't raise their children. The grandparent ghosts do, because the parents have their own lives to live until they no longer have a life to live and can take care of their grandchildren. So I found that really interesting. Pretty short book, pretty speedy. I wasn't in love with the ending, but the premise is great, the storytelling's great, and I had a good time with the writing style. Now we have Book with a Black Cat on It. Ooh, I know. Okay, so I was wrong. It's not a black cat. But in looking around, I wasn't able to find a book that had a black cat, but I did find a book with a cat. And that is Stephen King's Pet Sematary. This, at the time that I bought it, was my most expensive book. I believe I paid $65 or $85 for this because this is the original cover from when the book was released, and I am at that point where I can afford to spend a little more on some things that I want to splurge on, and I wanted the original cover because I listened to the audiobook initially, narrated by the guy who plays Dexter, the TV show, and it is still, after all these years, hands down the best audiobook I have ever read. His narration is so awesome and on point. It's just phenomenal. Can't recommend it more. And I really loved this cover artwork, so this is the book that I went for. Stephen King almost lost one of his children at one point in a car accident. Like, he was saved at the last minute before the car went by or something because of where they lived. So Stephen King took that incident, put it in the book, talked about grief around it, and made one of his most well-known and famous and well-done stories. This is still probably my favorite Stephen King, up there with Carrie and Needful Things. I think because of the audiobook, this is my absolute favorite Stephen King. So if you're looking for a Stephen King to try, you don't want to go through all of his books, you're really on the fence about whether or not you like him as an author, highly recommend Pet Sematary. If you read nothing else by Stephen King, read Pet Sematary, particularly the audiobook. Last prompt is Haunted House. Book set in a spooky house or ruins. I have lots of haunted house books at this point. Let me find the one I'm thinking of. So this one could count for spooky house or for ruins. This is A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. This is the first Josh Malerman book I read before picking up Bird Box. I really enjoyed this one. This is following a couple who's dating, and the whole story with the discovery of the house and them going through it is kind of a look at romantic relationships. So it's got that kind of literary aspect to it, but it still felt like a haunted house story. And I thought it was just a really unique premise. They're out in a lake for a date, and they actually find a house that is under the water, and they dive down to explore it. So it is kind of ruins too, because you have the ruins of this old house just hanging out under the lake. Really short, quick read. I heard at one point that this was actually out of print. I'm hoping they brought it back into print, because I think it's worth picking up. That is gonna be it. But check it out. So many books that I talked about today. That is gonna be it for this, the 6th of the 13 Nights of Halloween. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media, leave a comment down below on some books that you know that are on my shelves that you think I should have mentioned for this tag, or books that you would maybe put in this tag. Just interact with this video, let me know you're here, let me know you exist. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye, friends.